Hello, this is Suzanne Smith-Nash, and you're listening to the Fringe Journal and e-learning Corgi. Today I want to talk a little bit about Zitkala-Sha, and you might be aware of her because she was incredibly influential. She was a Yankton Dakota writer, editor, translator, musician, educator, and political activist who did amazing things to get people aware of what was happening in boarding schools and also in the oil fields of Oklahoma and the atrocities that were going on there. She was born on February 22nd, 1876, and died January 26, 1938. So who was Zitkala-Sha? Her birth name, Gertrude Simmons Bonnin, but she was actually Zitkala-Sha, which means red bird. She was Yankton Dakota Sioux, and she was born on the Yankton Reservation in South Dakota. She lived during an era of forced assimilation and boarding schools. And during her life, she was a musician and a writer and just all around engaged person. She was an activist because she was passionate about standing up for the Indigenous peoples and what had happened and what was happening. So here's a photo of Zitkala-Sha, and here she is with her violin, and she learned to play when she was at school. So her literary and artistic voice, she attended boarding school at age 8, and it was not an easy time. It was very difficult. She wrote about cultural erasure. For example, she talked about how difficult it was to leave her family. She talked about loss and longing. She talked about the trauma and shock of having her long hair cut short. She published groundbreaking essays in the Atlantic Monthly in 1900. And then in 1901, she published Old Indian Legends, which was her first book. And you can see here's a copy that was for sale on eBay. And what a beautiful design. So, the essays in the Atlantic Monthly, as mentioned before, brought attention to boarding schools. Later, she published American Indian Stories in 1921, and it compiled her autobiographical work with other work. So she was a political activist, and she advocated passionately and untiringly for Native Americans, for Indigenous peoples. So first of all, she documented reservation conditions. So she went from reservation to reservation and she took notes, she took photographs, and she documented the horrors. She advocated for reform. She co-founded the National Council of American Indians in 1926. She fought for Indian Citizenship Act in 1924, and she lobbied Congress for Indigenous rights and self-determination. And then finally, she served as the president of the National Council of American Indians until her death in 1938. Here's something that really touches me as a native Oklahoman. She exposed corruption in Oklahoma. So in 1924, Zitkala-Sha co-authored the explosive report, Oklahoma's Poor Rich Indians, an orgy of graft and exploitation of the 5 civilized tribes, legalized robbery. It exposed systematic fraud, corruption, and even murder perpetrated by court-appointed guardians, attorneys, local officials. So if you think about flowers or the Flower Moon and those recent movies and Killers of the Flower Moon, in that recent book and movie, think again, think Zitkala-Sha, who exposed everything even earlier. So she talked about how court-appointed guardians, attorneys, and local officials conspired to defraud Native Americans of their oil-rich lands and leasing fees in Oklahoma. And here's just a rather grainy simulacrum. Well, it's a grainy image of that original report. And so notice she's the first author, Gertrude Bonnin. And then there's Charles H. Fabens and Matthew K. Looks like Schiffen or Sniffen. Well, I don't know. Anyway, it'd be worthwhile checking into. The investigation helped prompt government action, and it influenced the passage of the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. So here's her lasting legacy. She was a pioneer who navigated two worlds without abandoning her heritage. She inspired generations of Indigenous writers and activists. She demonstrated the power of storytelling as resistance, and her work remains relevant. Cultural preservation, representation, self-determination. Those are things that can be looked at as lasting impacts. So here are a few quotes from Zitkala-Sha. Quote 1 from Why I Am a Pagan, which she wrote in 1902, or was published. A wee child toddling in a wonder world, I prefer to their dogma my excursions into the natural gardens, where the voice of the Great Spirit is heard in the twittering of birds, the rippling of mighty waters, and the sweet breathing of flowers. If this is paganism, then at present, at least, I am a pagan. And then here's quote 2 from American Indian Stories. There is no great, there is no small, in the mind that causeth all. It's really philosophical and makes me think of Buddhist thought. At any rate, it's really beautiful. And thank you for listening to this initial very, very, very light overview of the amazing contribution of Zitkala-Sha. And I just wanted to mention too that if you do a Google search, you can find many of her works in public domain in Project Gutenberg and also archive.org. So search and read and think. Thank you.